My name's Matthew Green, and I'm delighted to welcome Charlie Morley to Resonant World. Welcome, Charlie. It's great to have you back, I think, because we've spoken many times in the past.
Yeah, man. It's great to be back and great to be here with you now.
Yeah, well, for those of you who don't know Charlie, he's doing incredible work with military veterans using lucid dreaming to heal post-traumatic stress. And this is obviously a subject very close to my heart. I've done a lot of work with veterans in the past. And it's also, I think, a conversation that takes us to the very edge of the paradigm of mental health and consciousness. What you're doing is really radically different from anything that's being offered in the medical system up to now. And I'm really excited about exploring how your story, your journey to this topic, and the latest work you've been doing connects with the kind of work we do with Thomas Hubel on collective and intergenerational trauma and building healing communities that can obviously support the individuals that are suffering these terrible symptoms, but also drive bigger systemic change to meet some of society's most intractable challenges. So we've got a really exciting conversation ahead. Thanks, Charlie. So why don't we start with your story? Like, before we get to lucid dreaming, how did you get to be a lucid dreamer?
So there are two parts of this story. Let's do the more vulnerable one and funnier one. So I was a bedwetter till I was like 7. And I know it's 7 because I remember clearly on my 6th birthday or the day before and my 7th one saying like, I've got to stop wetting the bed tomorrow, mummy, because then I'll be 6 years old. I got before 7 years old. So I know it was up till 7. And I would have these dreams, these like really intense dreams where I would be in a dream. Sometimes they'd be frightening, sometimes they wouldn't be. And for whatever reason, I'd really need to pee in the dream. And I remember the need to pee in the dream would like wake me up in the dream. So I'd be conscious I was dreaming. And then I would walk around the dream looking for a toilet. And I'd find a toilet and pee in the dream. Now, of course, you pee in a dream, it's a trap. You're going to wet the bed when you wake up. So I had these, kind of bedwetting incidents that led to these early lucid dream experiences. Then it goes dead for a bit. I know I stopped wetting the bed by the time I'm 8, so that kind of changed. But then before my 12th birthday, I remember clearly, and my dad confirmed this, asking for something called a Nova Dreamer, which is this like electronic sleep mask that you put over your face when you sleep. And it recognizes rapid eye movement, the flickers of the eyelids, and then sends red light, pulses of red light, which is supposed to be bright enough to enter your dreams, but not so bright to wake you up. And I read about this in the gadget section of the Sunday Times. I don't know if you remember in the 80s, there used to be this kind of gadget section that came with the, mail order stuff. Long story short, Dad was like, no, it costs 300 quid. You're definitely not having one.
And this was when you were 12?
Just before, so I guess I was 11 because I wanted it for my 12th birthday.
Yeah.
So I know I was having lucid dreams then and wanted to have more because I remember telling my dad, like, oh, this can give you those dreams I have where you can control what you're doing in your dreams and stuff. Then again, memory goes dark for a little bit. And then I'm 15, 16, and I just start getting interested in the mind and philosophy and Buddhism, but it seemed a bit too kind of difficult. But I start reading kind of The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama and stuff like that and looking at these like Shaolin Kung Fu monks. And suddenly lucid dreaming seems really cool again. So I get these books from the school library and basically teach myself to lucid dream because it is a learnable skill. You know, you can follow the practices and have lucid dreams. But I think because I had this early experience base to work from, I kind of got the practice maybe a bit quicker. So then, start having lots of intentional lucid dreams. So a lucid dream is a dream where you know that you're dreaming as the dream is happening. So like you're completely asleep, you're sound asleep, but in the dream, reflective consciousness reawakens and you go, oh, wow, I'm dreaming right now. And now I can choose what to do. Now at 15, 16, what did I choose to do in this huge realistic virtual reality simulation of my own mind? Have loads of sex with girls and do loads of skateboarding. And actually, I got quite good at skateboarding, so maybe those neural pathways things work. Not so much the other thing, though. So getting to that first couple of years, I'm just using it for just, sex, skateboarding, having fun. But later on, when I was 17, I had a period, not that long, it was only like a year or two, but I got kind of deep into the like drum and bass rave world and drug scene and psychedelics, but not any therapeutic use of psychedelics, like rave, like warehouse rave psychedelic use. And then one night that peaked into something really, really scary. And I had like a classic near-death experience, the kind of tunnel of light, actually not dissimilar to this logo we've got up here. because it was this dark tunnel, but it was purple. And I have this kind of tunnel of light experience, and then the classic life flashing before your eyes thing. And then actually at the end of the tunnel, everything like went into this huge infinite void of blackness, just infinite void of blackness. And then in this blackness, this voice emerged, and it was my voice, like clearly my voice in my accent, in completely neutral tone, went, Charlie, do you want to live or do you want to die?
Wow.
And I was like, whoa, we get a fucking choice, man. This is nuts. And then in the experience, I yelled or felt like I was yelling, live. I remember just like yelling, like making that choice, like live.
Wow.
And then again, I don't know whether this is real memory or false memory, but the memory I have is hearing this sound, almost like a drumming. And I was like, what the fuck? Like very quick. I was like, what's that drumming? And then I realized it was like the sound of my heart starting again. It was like,
wow.
And then I opened my eyes. My friends are over me trying to like, you know, get me awake, and then bam, blackout. And then, yeah, man.
Whoa.
So it was, you know, nowadays with, you know, 20 years of Buddhist training, I might really enjoy a near-death experience. I might be able to enter into it mindfully. But at 17, man, that messed me up. And I had really bad panic attacks, anxiety. I was like locking myself in the toilet cubicles at college. And actually it was in the toilet cubicle that I had the real breakthrough, because it was just for my A-levels. So this was like 6 months later now, no, about four months later. And I'm in the toilet cubicle locking myself in because when I'd have these panic attacks, the sky seemed really high. It's a weird thing to say, but the sky seemed too high. So I'd want to be in a really enclosed space, like a toilet cubicle. And I locked myself in. I remember just thinking like, mate, it's like our A-levels in a few months. Like, what the fuck? You have to get this sorted. And I thought then, I was like, right, I'm going to go to the nurse at college. It's the, you know, the school nurse. And I thought, nah, man, if you tell them what's happening and what has happened, you might get chucked out for drugs. You might get put in a psych ward. So I thought, okay, right, I'm not going to do that. How am I going to deal with this myself? And I thought, okay, meditation stuff from this Buddhism I've been reading about, and lucid dreaming. Because in all these lucid dreaming books I'd read, there was always a chapter saying how lucid dreaming could perhaps in the future, you know, there weren't many studies that had the potential in the future to be used to treat nightmares and PTSD. And it basically, all of them said, if you could intentionally stay in the nightmare, if you became lucid in the nightmare, stay in there and face your fear. Now, I didn't know quite, it didn't give anything else. It said, face your fear. So I was having these terrible nightmares ever since the near-death experience. And they'd happen like weekly. They're always weekly at exactly a week after the event. So it was always Saturday evening going into Sunday morning. I'd have these terrible, terrible nightmares. And I would often become lucid in them. Like many people listening might know, like if you think, oh, I've never had a lucid dream, but I might have had a nightmare. Or in the nightmare, I've been like, oh, wow, I got to wake up, got to wake up, got to wake up. That was a lucid dream, right? The moment you acknowledge there was a place to wake up to. So anyway, managed to get lucid at one of these nightmares, remembered the thing about facing your fears, and I turned to face it. It was always this little dwarf would appear. I don't know why, but the dwarf, the shaven-headed dwarf was a symbol of death. Like when he appeared, the dream would be totally normal, then this dwarf would appear just looking at me at one eye. And that meant you didn't say yes. You're still in the NDE and you're dying. You're like in the death.
So it hadn't resolved in some way.
Man.
It was, you'd had this epic initiatory moment, but part of you was still in it, actually.
Yes.
How did it
Very
resolve?
good point.
Yeah.
Very good point. I've never thought of it like that. Anyway, so I turned to face the dwarf, and I know you're supposed to hug him and show him love and integrate him, but I remember just being like, fuck off.
Yeah.
I get it. As in like, I don't know what I'm meant by get it. Like I get that this is a dream. I get that. I get what you're representing. I understand. And when I yelled this at the dwarf, his face changed. And rather than looking at one eye, he went, and then went, ta-da, like a magician, like ta-da. And when he went ta-da, the dream scene completely changed into what I kind of now realize must have been a 17-year-old's view of paradise. It was this big skateboard ramp, you know, the big vert skateboard ramps. And at the top of the skateboard ramp, there'd be girls in bikinis smoking spliffs. And like, that was obviously like my vision of paradise at 17. But I knew in that moment, I was like, whoa, it changed. And I knew I would never have that nightmare again.
Yeah.
I didn't. And I didn't know what PTSD was back then. But now, you know, 8 years of working with veterans and traumatized populations, I can absolutely kind of self-diagnose that I was having 4 or 5 months of PTSD nightmares. And that one lucid dream cured it.
So then the anxiety resolved
They
after that.
stopped. Yeah. So the nightmares stopped instantly. The daytime anxiety was like a slow fade. It took maybe like a week or so after that for the panic attacks to stop. So I can't say that was like overnight, but the only thing that changed, only thing that resolved was the nightmare. So I think that was probably due to that as well. Or maybe just not having the nightmares decreased my anxiety level so much that the panic attack stopped. Who knows? So my like genesis into this, like way before I started teaching this stuff, started around trauma.
But it's amazing to think that you had this early impulse before the age of 12 to start exploring your consciousness in the dream world. And then this real threshold experience, this initiatory ordeal almost, this near-death experience that didn't fully resolve, that was leaving you with severe symptoms by the sounds of it. And then you were able to essentially heal yourself with what you were reading and integrating around lucid dreaming. But how did you then find more of a system or understanding that would enable you to build on that really embodied experience and actually begin to take that and share that with other people?
So I'm like 17, right? So I'm doing my A-levels and stuff. So nothing really happens then. I have this big experience. And I did think like, fuck, that's nuts, man. I had that lucid dream and now like the nightmares stopped. That's cool. But I go back to being a teenager.
It makes the contents of your A-level exams look fairly prosaic, doesn't it? That you're having these massive epic awakenings and healing moments. And meanwhile having to do your write your English A-level or whatever you
exactly
were doing.
That. It was English, yeah. So, I mean, what does happen after that is I get really into Buddhism. So up to that point, I'd been reading some Buddhist books. But after the near-death experience, because it was really bad afterwards, I didn't want to look at it again. But once the nightmares had stopped and I could then reflect on what happened, I was like, whoa, man, I had a near-death experience. That's nuts. So then I start looking at near-death stuff and Buddhism, and that leads you to Tibetan Buddhism. If you're looking at Buddhism, then you have an NDE. That draws you towards Tibetan Buddhism because it's the most wonderfully morbid form of Buddhism. You know, this is the place that we get the Tibetan Book of the Dead, famously cited, and all of these practices on the bardo and initiations into death and stuff. So I started getting really into Buddhism. And at the end of college, I made this commitment that when I leave college, the day I leave college, I'm going to shave my head. So I had like another year after that. I'm going to shave my head, become a vegetarian and start going to the Buddhist center. I'm going to be a real Buddhist. And I did do it. I had long ponytail. Day after college, I chopped it off, gave it to this cancer charity called Locks of Love. I don't know if they still exist. But you basically send your hair and they make these wigs for kids. And then like a few months later, they send you a photo of a kid like wearing your hair. Like, thank you for the wig. So I did that, then got into Buddhism and started going to a Buddhist center more often. And then again, more and more often, got really into it. Ended up living in a Buddhist temple for 7 years with the monks and nuns, obviously not as a monk or nun, but living with them.
That was in London?
Yeah, that was in London, like in Bermondsey. Yeah, people often think that this Buddhist center was in the countryside or somewhere. It wasn't.
Or in the Himalayas.
This is London.
Yeah.
Which was so cool because you're in this like haven of spirituality. But 10 minutes down the road, there's the Den, Millwall Football Stadium. And I loved that. I mean, I live next door to it now, literally two doors down. So it stayed in the Buddhist center. And I mean, this was actually before I started living in the center, but I started training with some Buddhist teachers who were teaching lucid dreaming in the context of Tibetan Buddhism. And you get this term dream yoga or milam naljo, which is a series of practices found within Tibetan Buddhism that have lucid dreaming at their core. So I get into Tibetan Buddhism, start reading all the death stuff, and then they keep talking about lucid dreaming as a preparation for death. I'm like, what? I've done lucid dreaming as a preparation for death. So suddenly everything started coming together. And then there were two people who were kind of teaching dream yoga in this particular Buddhist lineage. This guy called Rob Nairn, who's a Zimbabwean teacher who died last year, and a guy called Lama Yeshe Rinpoche, who's a Tibetan, indigenous Tibetan, who set up the first, or was part of the group who set up the first Buddhist center in the West, first Tibetan Buddhist center in the West, called Samaling. So I started training with them, doing all their retreats, getting kind of one-on-one teachings with them. And then a few years later, they thought it'd be a good idea if I gave a talk at one of Rob Nairn's retreats, workshops in London. I gave a talk, and then kind of another cool moment at the end of the talk, I gave a talk on lucid dreaming and my experiences, and then Rob Nairn, without asking me, goes, "Who thinks Charlie should run a 6-week lucid dreaming course starting next Tuesday?" And everyone puts their hand up. And I was like, wow, I feel like I'm in a movie right now, like on a Karate Kid moment. And And then I did do a 6-week course. He actually gave me 2 weeks to prepare rather than one. And my mum drove me there because I was so sure that no one was going to turn up to the course that I wanted my mum to drive me there so she could drive me back and I wouldn't be embarrassed on the tube. And then we pulled up and I remember, we pulled up with my mum, right? And we drive, because there was no parking at the Buddhist Center. So we drive past the Buddhist Center and I go, oh, my mum, there's a double booking. And she goes, what? And I go, look. And there's this line of people outside the Buddhist Center. And I literally thought it was a double booking. I was like, oh no, they put me on the wrong night. And I walked past this crowd and oh, hello, Charlie. And I'm like, what? And then Lama goes, look, Charlie, you're students. Wow. And like says like teasingly, you're students. I was like, whoa, is everyone here for the course? And I was like, wow. Yeah, so it was my mum and, 20 or 30 other people. And they went from there.
Wow. I really want to learn to lucid dream. As I hear this, I do dream and I remember dreams. And we were talking earlier, I do keep a dream diary and I do read it back and see images. But the idea of actually coming awake in the dream holds enormous appeal to me. And I would love to learn that.
Well, you got a really good foundation of dream work. I mean, the dream you were telling me before we came in now, it's like, that's not what in Buddhism you'd say a samsaric dream, a dream of kind of everyday samsara. That's like a clarity dream.
Well, I should share it with our audience. I had a dream last night that my mother, who died a few years ago, came to visit me in the garden of our family home, where I used to live, and said to me, you don't feel safe in your body and you need EMDR, I will give it to you. This is EMDR, the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Many people are familiar, which uses some kind of bilateral stimulation to help process trauma. And I woke up, I thought, wow, that's a very unusual dream. I very rarely dream about my mother. In fact, the last time I really dreamed about her was very shortly before she died. And I had an impression of her and I thought she was ill for a long time. And her death was not a surprise to me after that. But there was something in that message that I feel I felt like, as you say, it wasn't an everyday dream. Yeah. It was telling me that I need to do some more work on myself. So yeah, I do have a dream life, but I think lucid dreaming is the next level. So there'll come a time, Charlie, when you teach me to lucid dream.
I'm ready.
But let's go to the veterans now, because this is also a domain that we both have a connection with. I wrote a book years ago called Aftershock.
Which is brilliant.
Well, thank you. Where I spent a couple of years interviewing military veterans in the UK and their families about the impact of trauma from war and how they were seeking new ways to heal from this trauma, because so much of what was on offer from the medical system just wasn't working. So I've had a long-standing interest in new trauma treatments. And you've published a study which has had some remarkable results. So maybe you could tell us about that. Yeah.
So I started working with veterans about 8 years ago. A guy called Keith McKenzie, who's a retired veteran of the Parachute Regiment. He came on one of my lucid dreaming retreats that I was running in Holy Isle, which is amazing little island off the coast of Scotland.
Wow. And what a place to learn.
Yeah, it was so cool.
I mean, the problem is you could wake up and still think you were dreaming in Holy Isle, right?
Exactly. So he comes to Holy Isle and I'm saying a lot, long story short, but I know we have limited time with this podcast. Long story short, he had a big breakthrough experience working with the nightmares, PTSD nightmares he had, which actually were not just from his time in the paras, but actually 20 years of firefighter service. He said that was actually where a lot of the PTSD came from, because it was daily or kind of weekly exposure. And he sent me an email a few weeks after the retreat with this great line: I healed more of my PTSD in that 4-day retreat than 4 years of therapy. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Can I put that quote on my website? Blah, blah. So it goes up on the website. And then me and Keith become friends. And a couple of years later, he becomes trained as a mindfulness teacher and Buddhist chaplain for the armed forces, which I remember he joked saying, oh, it sounds like a vegetarian butcher, doesn't it? Buddhist chaplain, armed forces Buddhist chaplain.
I've met some chaplains in the military and they're quite a special breed. They're a very, very interesting group of people. Yeah.
Yeah. So he does this and then he goes, and I'm running these retreats for veterans. Will you come and teach some of the lucid dreaming stuff that worked for me on the retreats? And I was like, yeah, man. I mean, I have no idea. You're the only veteran I know apart from my grandparents and stuff, but let's try. So we go on this first retreat and I was so out of my depth, man. I mean, working with veterans, it's such a unique population. Like the first thing that hit me was the quickness of the banter and the quickness of the banter, the amount of swearing, and the disses. You're just constantly dissed. Like you're shown how much you are loved by how much you're insulted. So I'm used to like running like Buddhist retreats, right? And places like Holy
It's
Isle.
a slight culture shock.
So I go to this veterans retreat and they're like, I think the first guy went, "Hey, you're fucking Charlie, aren't you?" "Ah, you look like a dickhead to me." And I was like, did he just call me a dickhead? And then he slaps me on the back and I realized that was my welcome. And that being called, "You look like a dickhead to me," was like, "You look all right." I was like, whoa, this is just completely, big shift.
Wow, love that.
Anyway, I mean, it was brilliant. It was brilliant. And I loved the work so much. And on like the first night when we were just looking at how the sleep stages work, before we'd even got onto lucid dreaming, we were looking at how the sleep stages work, how normal it is to wake up after 4 or 4.5 hours sleep because you have a natural break in the cycle. But at that point, the hypnopompic state, which is the state waking up, often puts the mind into sharp clarity, which is why you might get these thing called the 4 a.m. demons. We've been looking at what the 4 a.m. demons are. And this guy who came down, Tommy, the next day, and he'd slept for 7 hours. And that was the longest sleep he'd had since he could remember, or he said since like leaving the forces. Like, slept for 7 hours straight. And he said, "I did get the demons, but they came," and I looked at the clock and I went, "Hey, he's right, 4 hours later." And he said, just the fact of knowing it was normal and having a name for it, the 4 a.m. demons, and oh yeah, look, it's that hypnopompic thing he said. The mind's really clear. I keep thinking about the thing I didn't want to think about, allowed him to move from fear to fascination. And as one Buddhist teacher once told me, it's always stuck in my head. Fear and fascination cannot exist in the mind at the same time. So if you can move to a state of fascination or interest in that which scares
curiosity.
you, the fear goes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And really to underline like how widespread that kind of awful insomnia, that paralyzing insomnia is for many veterans, but also many other people with trauma. And how much of, I think, and having read your book, Wake Up to Sleep, how much of our difficulties in sleeping are trauma related as well.
Yeah.
Like that's a whole piece where I think your work can help huge numbers of people actually.
Yeah, so the first few years that I was working was just with veterans. And I was under the naive assumption that the trauma of a military veteran would, of course, be far worse than the traumas of everyday populations. So it wasn't until about like 4 or 5 years of doing these retreats, especially designed for British military veterans, using lucid dreaming, breath work, yoga nidra, deep relaxation, all this other stuff, and qigong movements, that I started working with non-military traumatized populations. And I was under this naive assumption that like, oh, their trauma won't be as bad. Complete bullshit. Trauma is trauma, whether from a literal war zone or from a familial war zone. And often the trauma from a familial war zone is far worse.
Yeah.
Far worse, because it goes on for decades and it occurs in the safe space. A veteran going to a war zone, it's absolutely traumatic, absolutely terrible. Nobody doubts that. But there is a sense of knowing that I'm going into a war zone. There's a sense of expectation that what I'm about to meet is going to be a life or death situation. For people with complex PTSD who've grown up in houses where their safe space is a place of abuse and their safety givers have turned out to be abusers, that goes to a very deep level, and the trauma embeds itself very, very deeply in the body and brain system. So what I found out was actually trauma's trauma. So I started opening the workshops up to anyone who's working with trauma. And then beyond that, I realized everybody's got trauma. It's just degrees. Like if you were a child, you experience something traumatic. The act of being a child is traumatic. You have no sense of agency. You have no money. You have no choice. You know, you lose your parents in a shopping mall. That's life or death to a kid.
Even being born. I mean, it goes to Stanislav
traumatic.
Grof's work, the perinatal matrix, and how we come into the world.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was present. To digress, I was present at the emergency delivery of my daughter. And delivered her, and I found that incredibly traumatic.
Yeah.
Even though it was beautiful and amazing at one level, I mean, it was traumatic for me. And I wonder. I think the least traumatized people were my wife and my daughter. I was the one holding the whole situation. And
I mean, and anything that overpowers our capacity to cope and to integrate the experience will have a traumatic impact on us.
Yeah.
So in no way am I minimizing the deep and powerful trauma of veterans and those exposed to traumatic situations. And also, I'm saying there are a lot of people who believe they're completely trauma-free who almost certainly aren't and could benefit.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? It's the way the trauma defense mechanism, in a way, absences or convinces us that we're okay and functioning when actually large parts of our system are shut down or frozen without us even realizing it. And we start to see symptoms in our life that we don't recognize as trauma symptoms, but which they absolutely are.
Yes, denial and the normalization of our internally traumatized world are like two of the biggest defense mechanisms.
And we see that, and looking at it from the kind of collective trauma perspective through the work with Thomas Hübl, we would see that operating on a societal level. So there is a kind of collective agreement that this is just the way things are. Yeah. This is how life is. When we would say, actually, no, this is what a hurt society is. It's not actually what life should be.
Yeah.
And so it impacts individuals, but when we have lots of individuals carrying trauma, it creates a traumatized society.
I totally agree.
And then becomes self-reinforcing because what is actually a trauma response is seen as normal.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember, as you speak, that great quote from Gabor Mate, something like being classed normal in an abnormally traumatized society is nothing so great. Something like that. Yeah. So working with veterans and stuff, saw the potential of lucid dreaming, did this, got this grant, Winston Churchill grant, to go to America and study best practice in mindfulness-based approaches to PTSD in veterans. Studied all the breath stuff, learnt the breath, body, mind stuff, trained as a yoga nidra teacher when I was there, I-Rest, which is this kind of trauma-sensitive form of yoga nidra, and then came back and started to put that all together to something that could be a really powerful intervention for PTSD, so we thought. Then I get a call from ION, so Institute of Noetic Sciences, this guy called Dr. Garrett Yunt, who's a molecular biologist who was aware of the work I'd done with veterans.
And the Institute of Noetic Sciences is based in California,
it's in San Francisco,
Set up by Edgar Mitchell.
Absolutely.
The astronaut.
Yeah, and they do really cool science. They do the kind of science a lot of people don't want to do. They do investigations in a kind of psychic capacity and stuff like that, and most of the time prove that no, you don't have psychic capacity. But sometimes they do.
Well, is it worth us just noting that Edgar Mitchell himself had an incredible, life-changing experience returning to Earth?
The overview effect.
Exactly, seeing the planet out from space gave him this kind of cosmic consciousness that absolutely changed him, and then he became committed to the path of exploring consciousness and all of these psi phenomena, and created established an institute that could kind of pursue that mission, which continues to this day. So,
IONS is very cool. They do very cool science.
But I love how these life-changing moments, like you had your own version of that with your near-death experience, right? Or out-of-body experience.
Imagine if Edgar Mitchell hadn't have looked out the porthole at that point.
We see these moments in our lives where something changes in such a fundamental way that we can't ever be the same again. And our life's whole mission and our life's work begins to grow out of that. And it may not be immediately obvious, but we can trace it very directly back to these awakening experiences.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So Garrett from IONS gets in touch, and he wants to do a study on lucid dreaming for people with PTSD. So I assume that our outcome model is going to be, can we reduce nightmares? Because there have been several studies done on lucid dreaming for kind of PTSD and nightmares, but the outcome is always, does it reduce nightmares? And it does. We know this back, I think the first study was like in the early 90s. So lucid dreaming as treatment for nightmares, very well established. Because if you can train someone to become lucid within that nightmare and know, oh, I'm not really back in Iraq in this traumatic experience, I'm simply dreaming I'm back in Iraq. So actually I'm in a state of safety. Where's my body? That which I'm scared that the integrity will be compromised. My body is in bed, a safe space.
And I don't need to wake up. I can stay sleeping and move on.
Exactly, yeah. So just the act of becoming lucid in a trauma nightmare is very powerful. And then the second thing you can do that I kind of showed in the example with the dwarf, but rather than yelling fuck off, would be to kind of move towards that which you are afraid of. So let's say you're in a recurring nightmare, you're in a car crash, you could become lucid in that dream and like make the car fly. Or you could actually, even better, let the car crash, knowing there's no one to die. There's no car, there's no you. So you can have these big experiences. That's well documented. But interestingly, he said, no, I want to see if we can work on people's waking state PTSD symptoms. I was like, oh, so not the nightmares. He goes, no, nightmares too. We'll check how we use the nightmare experience scale, as it's called, to see kind of how we can reduce people's nightmares. But I want to check people's daytime PTSD symptoms. Can lucid dream healing have such a powerful effect on the psyche that the next day, not only the nightmares have stopped, but can we reduce the panic attacks, the daytime anxiety, the flashbacks?
Hypervigilance, yeah.
Yeah, those kind of daytime PTSD symptoms. And I thought, that's cool. And scary, because I have no idea whether it can.
And that's really cutting edge, because that had never been done before.
Never been done, no.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, some of the veterans I work with, they've said their PTSD's got much better, but I've never had my stuff scientifically, scrutinized before. There was part of me that's like, what if they prove it's all, like, none of it works? What if they prove that it's just, I know there have been these standout studies, and I've had a few good clients, but maybe it doesn't work.
But I have moments like that when I've been immersed deeply in a collective healing space and seeing these amazing shifts taking place and ancestral trauma material arising and like really synchronistic occurrences. And then I go back to my kind of my day job, and I think, was that real? Like, can I really trust this?
Yes.
And actually, it's really hard to measure it in a way that the sort of the scientific method, as practiced in the academy, recognizes. It's difficult to capture this stuff. So I can understand why you would have had a moment of pause around that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was literally a moment, and I was like, yeah, wicked, let's do it. Let's go for it. So the study was supposed to happen in San Francisco. I was going to go over there and lead a retreat just for veterans. In the end, COVID happened, so we had to do it all online, which actually shows, I mean, God, it might have been even more powerful in person, but we managed to do it all online. The way it was set up, we got 55 people, all of whom had chronic PTSD. So to get on to the study, you had to have chronic or treatment-resistant PTSD, and it had to be a high level.
When you say chronic, how long?
I don't know. I can't remember.
But years?
Some people were some people might have been suffering for kind of 6 to 12 months,
right.
But there were a lot of people who had long-term PTSD. I mean, I think one of the oldest gentlemen we had on the first study was a Vietnam veteran.
Wow.
So, I mean, he must have been early 70s, I guess. And there were some people who had a lot of people had childhood sexual abuse. Some people had been in a car crash the year before and had been only recently diagnosed with PTSD, but nothing seemed to be working. So we get this group. About 2/3 ended up being women. Mainly from the US and the UK and Australia, and a few people from Europe. And in the end, it was a mix. It wasn't just veterans. We had veterans, we had non-military, and we had quite a lot of people with complex PTSD. Although that wasn't a marker to get on, but there were just so many people. I mean, this is another point to make. I rarely see someone who has single event PTSD. Yeah. The vast majority of people, actually, if you dig under the surface, it's CPTSD. I remember one of the veterans telling me, Charlie, we were traumatized before we came into the army. Yeah. And I went, what do you mean? He goes, who joins the army, Charlie? Yeah. And I was like, whoa, fuck, man. That's a big statement. Big statement. And of course, just his opinion. So we get this group, and the scientists, the kind of model of study of the data is at the beginning of the week, we got 1 week with them, which is kind of crazy. Like I've said we needed 4 weeks at least, but we've only got funding for 1 week. So at the beginning of the week, everyone takes the nightmare experience scale. So how bad are their nightmares and a level of distress and frequency of nightmares, and the DSM-5 PTSD PCL-5 checklist score, which is basically a list of multiple questions of PTSD severity, which is used in medical models. Again, if I'm saying anything that's not correct, you can look up the study. It's in the Journal of Traumatology, published June 2023. So if I forget some of these facts, then please look it up.
We've written about it in Resonant World, so it's all there online. Yeah.
So they take the PTSD score at the beginning of the week, and then I have 1 week with them, like 2 full days of teaching lucid dreaming, end up being 22 hours of lucid dream tutorial training. So I'm basically teaching people to lucid dream. None of them had any experience with lucid dreaming, but about 11% had lucid dreams before. So basically the majority of the group didn't have any experience. And they started having lucid dreams, like a lot of them. Wow. We had about 75% of people in that week had one or more lucid dreams. Some people had several lucid dreams. throughout the study. And about 65% of that 75% had what was classed as a healing lucid dream. So the practices I was teaching people, because lucid dreaming is a learnable skill, they're kind of self-hypnosis techniques, their use of affirmations, falling asleep doing certain meditations, waking up at certain points in the middle of the night when you're most likely to be deep in a REM period, doing an affirmation practice, then dropping back in, certain things you do. But the main practice is something called dream planning, which is kind of like an art therapy exercise where you create on a piece of paper like a vision board of the lucid dream that you want to have. So we were asking people to write and draw the exact lucid dream they want to have. So this would mean choosing a certain traumatic event or traumatized aspect themselves that they want to directly send healing to in the lucid dream. Because there were so many people working with childhood sexual abuse, we realized that, to become lucid and call out like childhood trauma, come to me, and then meet this personification of their childhood trauma, which is possible, by the way, would be way too much exposure. And if you were to do that, probably you'll just wake up, because there seems to be this like inherent self-regulation mechanism in the mind that just a bit like putting your hand to fire. If it's too intense, you wake up, which actually makes lucid dreaming quite a safe form of trauma integration. If you go into trauma trigger in a one-on-one session in the waking state, there's no ejector seat. You're there until you can ground yourself. And if the therapist isn't holding space, well, who knows? Can you ground yourself? Whereas in a lucid dream, if it gets too intense, bam, you wake up off the ejector seat. So there's like something built in there. And of course, because it was a scientific study, we had to get this passed by the ethics committee and stuff like that. And all of them were very happy that it was safe. So for example, let's use this childhood sexual abuse model. So we thought, well, how is there a way that somebody can get to that part of themselves that's been wounded by childhood sexual abuse without having to directly confront the trauma in the lucid dream? And we thought, well, use the inner child. The inner child is this kind of concept popularized first by Jung and then many after him, which is the symbolic representation of your connection to childhood. So that part of you that still connects to your childhood, this kind of archetypal representation. Now, the cool thing about lucid dreaming is that once you're in a lucid dream, everything is a representation of your mind. Like your dream last night where you met your mum and she advised you to have EMDR, if you could become lucid in that dream, oh wait, my mum's dead, so that must mean I'm dreaming. Whoa, mum. Oh, first of all, like, oh, mum. Like, oh, that really hit me. My own mum's died. And then, once you've embraced your mum, you could then ask her, what do you represent? And she can tell you. This is the cool thing in the lucid dream. Like, these representations of your mind will dialogue with you.
That's amazing.
So you can meet your fear.
So, because obviously when you have your dream diary the next morning, you're kind of trying to puzzle it out.
Yeah.
And some people say you almost shouldn't interpret the dream, but we want to understand what it's trying to tell us. And it's very liminal. And I love the idea that you can just ask the question.
Yeah. Yeah, if every dream is like a letter written from the unconscious to the conscious, as Jung said, a lucid dream is like a face-to-face conversation. It's like your unconscious there writing the letter, and then suddenly you're like in the office, and you're like, dude, and the letter was, mate, I was just writing to you, and now you're here. Okay, let's have a face-to-face.
I love that. That's really amazing.
Yeah, that's the image. Yeah. And of course, imagine if you had a pen pal for like decades, and then finally they walked into the room, you would not do small talk.
Yeah.
You would go, Matt, I've been writing to you for decades. Mate, okay, first things first, daddy issues. Next thing, sexuality. Next thing, spiritual. It would bring in the big things, right? Yeah. So this is how the lucid dream works. So anyway, these a lot of people made dream plans to meet their inner child. They would become lucid and call out for their inner child because the inner child was the archetype that was most dominant within them at the time the abuse occurred. So we thought, well, if they can meet that archetype, they don't need to know what the trauma was. They don't need to discuss it. They just need to heal and love the inner child. And that will indirectly heal the trauma. So we thought that was the kind of, working hypothesis.
Yeah, and it really connects with what I've been learning about and experiencing in the collective trauma work, is that trauma is what happens when we undergo an overwhelming experience out of relation. So if we're in relation when something awful happens, obviously with child abuse, that's the ultimate rupture of relation. It's why it's so traumatic. But even thinking back to your veterans, I noticed that so much of the time, it wasn't always the things that we might think would be traumatic. Even losing colleagues or witnessing terrible violence, often it was more the moral injury of when the commander didn't recognize what you'd been through, or you were essentially let go from the army without a proper transition. And there was a kind of element of rupture of relation with the military that was often more painful in some respects than the actual trauma that was presenting. So I think there's something really powerful in what you're describing, in how it was almost like traveling back through time. And we talk about this as well in the collective trauma work. The present can affect the past through trauma healing.
Totally.
There is a kind of backward causation that occurs, and it feels like you were almost opening a kind of wormhole into the unconscious to allow these people to reach back through time to their younger selves and provide the relation that was obviously ruptured, missing, or really violated at the time of their trauma.
Absolutely. And actually saying that, Keith McKenzie, who I mentioned at the start, he had one of his big breakthroughs just doing the dream planning exercise.
Right, wow.
Just the act of drawing out that traumatic event and then putting in this time he flies away to safety or something like that. I can't actually remember what his change made. This kind of nightmare rescripting was so powerful to him. He had a breakthrough experience
because
in the waking state.
The dialogue, you were enabling a dialogue between different parts of the mind, between deeper parts and the more kind of present waking consciousness that was already starting to do the work, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So they make these dream plans. Many people did the inner child one. They'd become lucid. I'm dreaming. What do I do? Remember the plan and then call out, inner child, come to me. And in almost all cases, like a little kid would appear, often the same gender as them, sometimes not. In one case, this woman, she called it out and there was this little girl who was just crying in a corner, like with her face like to the wall, which she said was exactly how she felt. And she just from a distance went, it's not your fault. I love you. It's not your fault. And the girl like dissolves into light and then she wakes up. And she had this big integration experience.
Wow. Even as you said that, I could feel something moving in me. The power of that. It was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like something again that's been stuck. Trauma is stuckness, isn't it? It's something that happened has broken the flow of time. And there's a piece of ourselves that is almost beside the river and needs to be retrieved. And in a shamanic idiom, we talk about soul retrieval. And we would think about energy fragmented from we can use different metaphysical frameworks, but there's some part of ourselves that's left behind that needs to be reintegrated. And that image of this child suddenly exploding into light feels like a beautiful illustration of that principle in action. Yeah.
So cool. And I agree totally. And also, in case there are some people listening who aren't so esoterically minded, let's look at the neuroscience of how this works. I haven't mentioned this yet, actually. So once you become lucid in a dream, the prefrontal cortex becomes activated. So in a non-lucid dream, your prefrontal cortex is deactivated, which is, they believe, where your kind of sense of self, your sense of agency, your sense of I am having an experience is prefrontal cortex activated or activation. So in a non-lucid dream, that's deactivated. That's why you can dream you're other people. You can dream you're a kid or you're friends with Beyonce and stuff like that, because your sense of self is very, very fluid. Once you become lucid, the prefrontal cortex reactivates. Makes sense, because you go, I am having a lucid dream. Okay, that makes sense, right? And they first discovered this in 2011 when they did the first fMRI scans on lucid dreamers. The next thing they found was, whoa, this is cool. Once the prefrontal cortex activates, neuroplasticity comes back online, which is disengaged in non-lucid dreaming. They then found that if they trained athletes to become lucid, and in their lucid dream they practiced their athletic discipline, they got better at their athletic discipline in the waking state. And they put that down to, because they're retraining their brain through the neuroplasticity.
Actual physical biomarker occurring.
In fact, so physical that they found people who had repeated lucid dreams, so frequent lucid dreamers, actually part of the brain becomes bigger. So if you open up the skulls of regular lucid dreamers, you would find a certain part of the brain, it's part of the brain that deals with out-of-the-box thinking and insight recognition, is physically, the grey matter density is physically larger than the brain of non-lucid dreamers. I mean,
another great reason to sign up to your training, grow your brain. I love it.
I don't think it's worked for me, but maybe other people have, So they found the same things happening in trauma integration. And it's not just that neuroplasticity is engaged, but neuroplasticity is engaged because the brain thinks you're awake. Once you become lucid and the prefrontal cortex activates, as far as the brain's concerned, I'm now having a waking experience. Because, an interesting philosophical aside, to the brain, wakefulness is not predicated on having your eyes open and walking around the daytime, predicated on prefrontal cortex activation, because that's where the sense of self lies, right? I mean, whole other rabbit hole there into self and all that stuff. So they found that the brain makes no neurological differentiation between waking state experience and lucid dream state experience. There's the crux of trauma integration. As far as the brain is concerned, if you have a lucid dream, and if you're having a nightmare, you're back in Iraq, but you become lucid in that nightmare. Now, as far as the brain is concerned, you're not back in a nightmare, you're back in that experience. And if in that experience you fly off to safety, or if in that experience you turn the bullets to flowers, these are all real life examples, or even better in that experience, you just walk towards the gunfire. You know, Iraq was a long time ago, my friend. This is just a dream. Nothing can hurt me. I'm completely devoid of fear because this is all just a mental fabrication. As far as the brain's concerned, that actually happened. So the hippocampus will take that new memory where you flew to safety or there was nothing that could harm you, and take the hippocampus is a bit like a USB stick, right? It takes long-term to short-term memory. It will deinstall that old traumatic memory and reinstall this new one. Because as far as the brain's concerned, you didn't dream it, you did it.
Wow.
And that's the underlying,
we
believe the underlying mechanism of how
amazing.
it works. Yeah. And we had other people, a lot of people with chronic pain. So one woman, her PTSD mainly manifests through chronic pain in the body. And she became lucid and she called out for healing. And when she called out for healing in the lucid dream, this big golden lozenge appeared. Like imagine a throat sweet, right? Like a strepsil, but it was gold. And it's like shining light, and this light shines into her and she starts vibrating with energy and then again like explodes into light. And she wakes up. And that was cool because she was kind of asking for interpretation. And I was saying, first, you don't need to. How do you feel? And secondly, I was like, if it were my dream, the lozenge would be a symbol of healing, right? I take lozenge when I've got a sore throat, when my communication is impaired. So lots of different examples, but basically we had 65% of people were able to have like what class a healing lucid dream. And after their dream and at the end of the week, we would be taking their PTSD scores, and we found a direct correlation between the people who had the powerful healing lucid dreams and people whose their PTSD score just dropped off the scale.
It's amazing. Yeah.
So much so, and you've seen the graph.
It is amazing. And I'll show the graph.
Maybe we can flash that on screen when we see it. We had, by the end of the week, 85% of participants of the 55 who joined, their PTSD score had dropped so low through the lucid dreaming intervention alone, they actually were beneath the PTSD threshold. When I asked a scientist what that means, he goes, well, beneath the threshold. I was like, yeah, but what does that mean? He goes, well, it means that like if they took the test again, they wouldn't have PTSD. Yeah. And I was like, the fuck? They're no longer classified as having PTSD. And he was like, yeah. And we weren't expecting this, Charlie. So we're going to do a 4-week follow-up study. And I was like, why? And I got the sense that he was like, we don't quite believe these results, mate. So we need to do a 4-week follow-up just to check. Was it a flash in the pan? Was it some weird group therapy that developed over the week where people were just kind of mirror neuroning each other? What is it? So we checked in 4 weeks later, so ended the intervention. No more contact with anyone, no more lucid dreaming. But then 4 weeks later, we took PTSD scores again. They'd actually dropped on average 1 point below. So the healing had continued for at least a month afterwards. I would love to do a longitudinal study to see how many people now, a year or year and a half later, are still free of PTSD symptoms, but we didn't have the funding. What we did have the funding to do, though, was do a 100-person randomized control, which is like the golden standard, using exactly the same protocol, me teaching exactly the same techniques. And we got those results back last month. They're due to be published this summer, and we replicated results. Wow. So for anyone thinking, oh, that was only 55 people, pilot study, how do you know it's true? We did it again under control conditions and replicated results. Yeah.
That's amazing. And these, just to emphasize that these are really extraordinary results, that you would have that degree of reduction in symptoms among so many people sustained over weeks. And as you say, I mean, we don't tend to use the word cure around trauma, right? But in a sense, you're getting towards being pretty symptom-free, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that is something very unusual for any trauma therapy, actually.
Yeah, I've spoken about it so much now over the last kind of 6 months or so since we got the results published that I'm kind of, maybe the excitement has gone from my voice. But there is no trauma intervention currently available that can reduce symptoms by that much in a week.
Yeah.
That is free. That is, because all the stuff I do for veterans is free, by the way. I should make that point. That's free. That is non-invasive, non-medical, non-addictive, and you do it in your freaking sleep. I mean, that sounds like this kind of snake oil cure, right? But it's true. It works. And it is without doubt one of the most powerful interventions for post-traumatic stress disorder currently available. Lucid dreaming.
Yeah, I mean, it is extraordinary. And what's coming to my mind is it's almost like you're going to be disrupting the psychedelic renaissance because the other thing is, I mean, as I was coming to the end of my research for my book, I was really interested in like body-based therapies, working with things like EMDR. We've talked about, I wrote about an amazing therapist called Lisa Schwartz and the comprehensive resource model, which is really an embodied therapy that uses all kinds of consciousness tools, should we say, I think to try to engage perhaps similar mechanisms that you're describing. And I was super excited about this kind of new paradigm as I thought of it. Then, of course, the psychedelic renaissance started to take off, and you would hear similar reports of people having 10 years of therapy in a single night, and some studies that showed really great promise for things like psilocybin for depression and so on. And I suppose in that case, like I became a great advocate for that myself. I shall I say a little, I have a more nuanced view. I still think that psychedelic therapy can provide incredible breakthroughs. And I've heard many, and I've been close to some examples of that give me a lot of confidence in saying that. At the same time, there's a whole nother level and layer to psychedelics, which can be pretty shadowy. There are genuine risks, and they're not always helpful for people, and they can actually, used in the wrong way, can cause a lot of harm. I don't get the feeling that lucid dreaming carries the same level of risk, and yet it seems to be there's some the level of breakthrough that you're reporting reaches or perhaps even exceeds the kinds of breakthroughs that we're hearing about from the psychedelic field.
Yeah, I'd see. In fact, I might even include lucid dreaming as a form of psychedelic
Well, indeed,
therapy.
mind manifesting.
Exactly.
Right,
What could be more
word,
psychedelic than a lucid dream? You're literally inside a 3-dimensional virtual reality simulation of your mind.
Yeah.
But you do it yourself.
Yeah.
So there are loads of comparisons there. And actually, I think people who are going to go into psychedelic therapy, a really good training for that is lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
Because to have a lucid dream, you have to train the mind to know what is the difference between a very realistic hallucination and reality. Because our dreams are so realistic, we're duped by them every night, right? We don't know we're dreaming until the alarm clock goes off. Crazy dream I just had, right? So lucid dreaming is a really good training for that, because most of the people who have bad trips or bad experiences through psychedelics, if you speak to them, it's because they misinterpreted or mislabeled the projections of their mind as dualistic reality. That there was a fucking demon there, man, a fucking demon. And it's like, I know those demons, they're fucking scary. But if you can be like, oh, whoa, it wasn't, I mean, it was a demon, but it was an internally generated demon of my trauma or demon of my fear. You know, that's a very different way of interpreting the experience. That leads to a very different outcome. So I think lucid dream training is really good prep for psychedelics. And I mean, there's pros and cons, right? You know, you give me 100 people and an hour to teach them lucid dreaming. God, an hour to teach lucid dreaming to 100 people, maybe 10 people would have a lucid dream after an hour. You give me an hour with 100 people and I give them all a tab of acid, 100 people will have an experience. 100 people. So pros and cons. But as far as safety, lucid dreaming is safer. Very, very few contraindications to lucid dreaming. We had to go through very strict ethics committee stuff, working with obviously 100% of people with PTSD in the study. So we had to make sure it was super, super safe. Very, very few contraindications.
So where do you go from here with this, Charlie? Because I suppose my great interest is collective trauma work, recognizing that trauma lives in societies, cultures, communities, institutions, systems at all levels. And it's often one of the biggest obstacles to introducing the kind of evolutionary updates, the changes that we need. I mean, we can look at the world around us and we know that we need to transform a lot of what at the moment passes for business as usual if we're going to have much of a future on this planet. You're able to take this work to scale in groups of people. I wonder whether there's a way of scaling it even further, or thinking about applications beyond even maybe trauma survivors, strictly speaking, beyond PTSD, and thinking about how this could have wider social benefits or maybe help to unlock transformation in organizations or companies or other institutions. It just seems to me like you have found something. You found this, we could call it a social technology almost, that has potentially really wide applications that we're probably only just starting to explore, right?
Very interesting. You remind me of a quote from Matthew Walker, who wrote the brilliant book Why We Sleep. Just recently, actually, on a podcast earlier this year, he said, we don't need to be worried about AI and the evolution of AI. We need to be worried about lucid dreamers. They're the next step in evolution. And I was, oh, that's such a cool phrase. Yeah, he's very kind of, when he wrote that book, I'm not sure he knew as much about lucid dreaming, but he now really knows the practice, and I think has had lucid dreams himself. And I mean, you know, he was kind of half joking, but it's true. There is this sense of like, imagine if we could bring lucid dreaming to scale. And in fact, all the things you mentioned, like working with entrepreneurs and athletes and stuff like this, was what I was doing before the work with the veteran. So totally it's applicable to that. I mean, if you can become lucid, you are inside your mind. So if you think of that iceberg theory of consciousness, right? The top 10% above the surface, the conscious mind, the bottom 90% of the iceberg beneath the surface. In a lucid dream, you're gaining access to the depths of the iceberg. You can't get more unconscious than asleep. You know, whereas things like hypnosis, shamanic journeying, you know, movement practices, brilliant bodywork practices, which are brilliant, and I endorse them all, they will give you conscious access to the kind of subconscious. You're beneath the surface of the water, but you're still awake. So the depth to which you can go is limited. Not that the practice is limited, but the depth to which you can enter the unconscious is limited because you're still awake. However, if you take wakefulness out of the equation, you can drop, bam, right to the bottom of the iceberg through sleep. Then when you're at the bottom of the iceberg, you reawaken consciousness. That is access to a depth of the unconscious mind unparalleled by any other modality. That's factual.
That's amazing.
Doesn't mean
think of it like that.
Yeah. I mean, doesn't mean lucid dreaming is better because it takes so much longer to learn. You know, that week where we got everyone lucid was rare. Most people, it takes a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months of training to have their first lucid dream. Whereas psychedelics and movement, hypnosis, all those other amazing things I mentioned, you can get there much quicker. But once you do get through lucid dreaming, it's deeper. So I do think it's a very powerful modality for everybody to learn, trauma or not. And my kind of mission for the last few years, you know, there's this guy called Padmasambhava who is the person who penned the Tibetan Book of the Dead and introduced the lucid dreaming practices and kind of tantric Buddhism into Tibet. And I have this like mission statement. You won't find it on my website, but it's my mission statement, which is to spread lucid dreaming into the West like Padmasambhava did in Tibet. Like, that's my mission.
Wow.
And to do that, it's doing things like this. It's doing podcasts. It's training facilitators. So for the last 2 years, I've been training groups of therapists, medical doctors, meditation teachers in how to teach lucid dreaming or how to facilitate lucid dreaming to clients of small groups. So it's not that they become a lucid dreaming teacher. They become, as they were, many of them were trauma specialists who now maybe once a week or once a month, a client might come to them and they think, actually, rather than these modalities, I'm going to offer you lucid dreaming as a modality. So just one of the many strings to their bows. I've been training groups of therapists to facilitate, and then also doing, you know, more commercial work. Like I just did a thing for this thing called the Kimpton Hotel, which is this great hotel in central London, this dream package where you go in, there's like a VR headset and some herbs and stuff and helps you have lucid, basically, which is very commercial.
And environmentally friendly as a way to travel, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Very low carbon.
Yeah. And I'm willing to do that, absolutely, to spread the word of lucid dreaming. And that got so much press, like mainstream press. And the press was saying like lucid dreaming to the mainstream. And then after we've had the interview about the VR headset and going to the hotel and practicing lucid dreaming, at the end of everything, I managed to kind of big up the trauma stuff. So I think it's that. It's about kind of spreading the word. So let people know about lucid dreaming.
Yeah, and I love the idea that we could, of blending these approaches. Obviously, a lot of the work we do with Thomas Hubel is very much about collective intelligence. Like when we come together in a group with certain relational practices, we call it transparent communication. We create a sense of safety where we discern that there's a kind of natural healing intelligence almost that's starting to operate in the group, between members of the group, and in the way certain interactions unfold. And then when you're watching someone else working through a trauma that may have resonance for your own life, you start to feel yourself processing in parallel, almost like parallel, like computers, parallel processing. We can have accelerated healing in a well-held group container. But thinking about how bringing dreaming in as a complement to that and really supporting that process, I find it like very exciting. And I wonder whether there is whether there's a way to explore almost more forms of social dreaming, where you come together and share dreams, and whether this mysterious intelligence that we intuit at work sometimes might even be speaking to us through more than one individual at times.
So good.
Yeah.
So, okay, firstly, I want to say there's a book that comes out next week. I haven't actually met this guy, but I'm on the pre-order of his book.
Oh, good time.
There's a book called Why We Dream. So in the same way as Matthew Walker wrote Why We Sleep, it's called Why We Dream. It comes out next week. It's by a medical neuroscientist. I can't remember his name. I hope that is going to really reignite the discussion, not just on sleep, because sleep is such a hot topic for the last few years, and that's brilliant, but specifically dreaming. Because we know what dreams are for now. 15 years ago when I started this, the jury was still out. What is dreaming? Is it just neurological firing? Does it have any meaning? Probably not, blah, blah. Now we know exactly what dreaming is for reconsolidation of memory and integration of trauma. The minor traumas of a humiliation at work, or the major traumas of a car accident or something like that.
But it's amazing that this is so new.
It's so
weird.
Like
that's not long ago, right? That we didn't know this. It's extraordinary.
But it was so obvious that's what dreaming is for. But we've only proved
it wasn't validated by the academy.
Exactly.
So to speak.
And of course, there's so many other benefits too. But if we look at dreaming for the kind of scientifically validated benefits about reconsolidation of memory, we know this. If you stop people dreaming, their short-term memory gets fucked. They have the inability to kind of recall new memory and faces and stuff like that. So we know this is real. So if you are working on a project at work and you're kind of future planning, how am I going to start this thing? Or what's this project we're going to do with this conference I'm working on? That night, you are almost certainly going to have to work through that content, because if the brain will prioritize what it classes as high value events, and it will work through those high value events in your dreams. Very interesting to say, this also includes anxiety dreams. Very cool French study from, I forgot her name, a brilliant French neuroscientist whose name I've forgotten. We can put it in the show notes. She did a study looking at anxiety dreams and found a direct correlation between having anxiety dreams before a high value event and how well that high value event went. That having an anxiety dream before a hot date, or before a business proposal, or before a military exercise, and in that dream, the hot date goes terribly. The military exercise leads to death. The board meeting, you can't get your words out. Actually, you're more likely to have a great date, have a great military operation, and for that board meeting to go well if you had the anxiety dream the night.
Because we'd think it would be the opposite, wouldn't we?
Yes.
We'd pathologize the anxiety and say, oh no, it shows that I'm worried and I'm not going to perform.
Anxiety dreams are fire drills.
Because it's kind of flushing it out of the system almost. Yeah.
It's your brain saying, this is a really high value event for you, isn't it? So what I'm going to do is spend this time creatively working through worst case scenarios, not so that they happen, but so you're more likely to be able to meet the challenge should they happen. So we know that dreams are working through this. So if you're in a big business doing a big creative project and you are not looking at what your dreams are doing at night, you are missing a massive optimization point against the opposition, who might also be going for that same, project or something. Dreams are so powerful. And just by keeping a dream diary, that's all we need to do. You don't need to interpret it, but just by keeping a dream diary itself leads to increases in mental well-being. Again, very cool study. They found, first of all, this is slightly less optimistic, that over 60%, so the majority of people's dreams, were classed as negative or anxiety dreams. This is people who don't do a lot of dream work. Most of the dreams are negative or anxiety dreams, but we know anxiety dreams are okay anyway. So what they found was that people were waking up in the morning, and even if they had no memory of the dream, their body remembered, because of course, as Bessel says, the body keeps the score. So if you've had an anxiety dream, or several throughout the night, you are going to wake up with cortisol and adrenaline flowing through your bloodstream and no awareness of why. So you're going to wake up feeling anxious,
which I often have in the morning. Yeah.
Okay, and me too in the past, and so many people will be able to relate to this. So they did a study where, first of all, they trained people to remember their dreams, which is actually as simple as falling asleep with a strong intention to remember your dreams, psychoeducation, telling people that actually everyone dreams every night, there's no way to stop the human brain dreaming, all this kind of stuff. And then they got them to either keep a dream diary or speak their dreams out loud. Either worked, right? They found that people who remembered their dreams and wrote them down or spoke them out loud had higher levels of mental well-being, because the act of writing down the dreams helped to, and I quote the study, download and discharge the negative somatic impact the dream had upon the person. So basically, writing it down released the anxiety.
Wow.
And then people had high levels of mental well-being. So writing down your dreams or speaking them out loud to your friend or spouse in the morning is good for you.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you're also going to see, oh, wow, that was me symbolically working through that creative project I've got to do at work. There's so many benefits for dream work, whether it's full on lucid dreaming or just writing down your dreams. Like there's a creative process happening for 2.5 hours every night that we are missing. If you're in a creative industry, actually, no. If you're a human being,
exactly.
If you're a human being, you're dreaming, and if you're dreaming, your brain will sometimes just be working through old stuff. Not every dream is laden with mystical meaning, but let's say 1 in 10 are. Then every 9 dreams you write down, just me working through this stuff. But 1 in 10, oh shit! I had a dream that my mum came to me teaching me EMDR. What a huge, powerful dream, just like you had.
Yeah.
So not every dream, but there are some dreams which are very powerful.
And I love that mission of cultural change, because I feel like we're at this point, we're in such a crisis point as a species. We obviously need to change. We can't go on as we are. And yet even the way we're trying to change is often recreating the paradigm that we're stuck in. And then there's pioneers like you who come in offering us something completely different, completely overlooked in our culture in a way. It's marginal. It's not something that we consider or really value, except as something very fleeting and at the very edges of our awareness. And you're saying, no, this is something we need to be paying attention to. It has these incredible healing benefits to begin with, but also it's showing us, it's giving us vital information about our lives, about our work, and about how we move through the world. And it feels like the time is ripe for that. I mean, there was a time when yoga, right, would have been considered to be a very obscure and kind of odd thing to spend your time doing. And now there's a yoga studio on every high street. And I sometimes think of the analogy of the waterborne theory of disease. In the 18th or 17th century, people had no idea what was causing cholera outbreaks and so on. And suddenly they realized that if we have clean water, it's actually really helpful to avoid large numbers of people dying every year. So I wonder whether we're on the threshold of a bigger shift in a way of interest in this work that could mean that we look back in a few years, in a couple of decades, and think, wow, we were so asleep, so to speak. I wonder how you feel about the prospect for that wider uptake now.
Totally. I mean, you reminded me of the controversial but very well researched study that came out last year, showing a very tenuous link between brain chemistry and certain forms of mental illness. Being, this old model that if we adjust those chemicals in the brain, you'll get better.
Yes, exactly,
serotonin uptake inhibitors and the like. Could there be a time where we look back and go, oh yeah, dreams have actually got something really important to tell us? Yes. And again, it needs to be carried out. Not every dream, just like not every thought.
Yeah.
Most of my thoughts all day are bullshit. But some of them lead to writing a book or something.
Yeah.
Should I throw all my thoughts out the window and never write that book? It's like the same with dreams. It's like, yes, some of our dreams are just working through stuff. But every now and again, we have a powerful dream. And, you can see if you're doing any form of inner work, if one is doing any form of inner work, it seems crazy that one is not already keeping a dream diary.
Yeah.
Because let's say you're on an 8-week mindfulness course or something like that. It's a week 6 and maybe you start to feel a little bit different, but probably it's quite subtle still after 6 weeks. But if you were keeping a dream diary, and I ask people to do this in an 8-week mindfulness course, by week 2, you will see your dreams change, I'm sure, because the intrapsychic world will change way before the consciously aware of the kind of ego mind world.
Yeah.
So, I always talk about my dad. I had a very difficult relationship with my dad growing up as a kid, right? And we only really started to heal our relationship maybe 10 years ago or something. And my dad would always appear in my dreams as just scary. He was telling me off, or he was scary, or he'd appear really big. And then I started doing this shadow work with my dad, especially this very powerful exercise from a book called Manhood. Which
you mean you did it with your dad, he was participating?
Yeah, so I'd done that's
remarkable.
Yeah, I'd done kind of work around the relationship, kind of therapeutic work. And then there was this thing that I wanted to do kind of with my dad. And he was actually up for it because I told him it was about research for my new book. That was my way in. And he was like, well, if it's research for your book, I'm sure we can do it. You know, but he was like stiff as fuck. He was doing it. We had this amazing breakthrough. Wow. Anyway, it's not so much about the breakthrough. It's about the change in the dreams.
We need to come back for another podcast.
Oh,
on that.
totally.
Yeah.
And actually, my new book, Do the Shadow Work, is all about shadow work. Yeah. Long story short, I've said it again. Dad changed in my dreams. He started appearing. In fact, the day after, or the not the night, but the next night after, I had this dream that my dad, we were sitting by the riverside and he was feeding me little sandwiches, little kind of triangular sandwich. I don't know what that meant, but, you know, feeding me these sandwiches.
Sandwiches we have as kids, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you
my
for
daughter
interpreting
eats
my
triangular
dream.
shaped
Yeah, you're right.
Sandwiches, yeah.
And he was feeding me, and it was this sense of like him giving me nourishment.
Wow.
You know, it changed. And then just recently, my dad's, you know, ill at the moment, and that's only recently come to pass. And that's completely changed our relationship too, because we realize that there's a limited amount of time now. And my dreams now with my dad, he just appears as so loving in my dreams.
Wow.
Because we've realized that any resentment that there might have been still in the past, we're like, mate, we got limited time. Just drop it. Just move into forgiveness. And the dreams have changed. It's like the dreams are a benchmark for our mental health journey. If you look at your dreams, you know, you want to know the state of your mind, look at your dreams. You know, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. You know, oh God, but I have loads of anxiety dreams and nightmares and stuff. Well, great. You have loads of fire drills. You have loads of trauma integration sessions. Nightmares are great for the mind. Anxiety dreams are great preparation for future events. And also, if you're doing a certain practice and find that you're having dreams about running through fields of gold and kind of sitting peacefully and stuff, that also is important. Wow, what I did in the day led to these dreams at night.
It's a good sign, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I really received what you said about your dad and the dreams. That really moved me. I really felt my whole system opening as you said that. It was very powerful, and I really felt the depth of that work. And I can't wait to read the new book. That's amazing.
Thank you.
I mean, we could talk and talk on this to sort of bring it into land now for people who are listening to this or watching and are really resonating with your mission, really inspired as I am by what you're offering, what you're bringing to the culture at large. Obviously, they can find your many books, your website. What is the best way to support this work? Is it to just start dreaming and taking the dream diary and learning to lucid dream, or is there more that can be done to really build momentum behind this vision that you have?
Momentum will come when people learn to lucid dream. So I say, teach yourself to lucid dream. You can learn for free through the internet. I've got loads of free stuff on YouTube. You can buy books. Others are available. But learn to lucid dream. Because if you learn to lucid dream, the excitement of having your first intentional lucid dream, you do these practices and you're
I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm going to do it.
Yeah,
I'm going to do it.
It's so much fun that if enough people have their first lucid dream, that will be the crucial tipping point. Because everyone will tell their mates, oh my God, this is so cool. I did this thing. I became lucid. I knew my body was asleep in bed, but I was in my dream. But I knew I was dreaming and I could choose what to do. So I flew about. It was so cool. Like, it doesn't need to be heavy trauma stuff, but just having a lucid dream is such an empowering experience. And there are so few, there are many modalities in the kind of well-being, self-development space that don't have such concrete evidence of results. Now, of course, we should not get attached to concrete evidence of results. But if you're completely unenlightened like myself, it's kind of cool to see if something's working. And the cool thing about lucid dreaming is you dream completely normally. Then you start doing these practices like dream journaling, like doing certain meditation exercises, you fall asleep, like waking up at certain points in the morning, falling asleep, doing affirmations, you know, all the practices you do. If you do those for a few days or a few weeks, eventually you will have a concrete evidence of results, as in you'll be in a dream and your dead grandma will turn up and you go, dead grandma, my dead grandma's my dream son. I'm dreaming right now.
Yeah, it's a completely qualitatively different experience.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, exactly. There's like quality. There's like you know when it's worked.
It's a total phase shift into a different world. Yeah.
Even that, for people who are going through disempowered times in their life, is so empowering. Yeah. You know. Oh, one other thing I should say when you talk about the group dynamic that I forgot to mention. Sorry, was in the study we did with the veterans, we found obviously those who had lucid dreams had this big shift. But there were a couple of outliers. There were a few people who actually had a massive drop in their PTSD score who did not have a lucid dream, let alone a healing lucid dream in that week. Now, this kind of threw off the scientists a little bit because, of course, they want like really kind of clear data. But for me, I looked at it and thought, whoa, that's even more impressive, because that shows that just learning about lucid dreaming and perhaps experiencing the vicarious healing of another veteran telling you about this powerful lucid dream they'd had was so effective that that led to a drop in people's symptoms. Now, people say, like, could there be a time where lucid dreaming is taught in the NHS? And actually, I recently did a talk just yesterday to the London School of Pediatrics around sleep and lucid dreaming. So who knows, maybe that time is coming. I think, well, it's kind of, it takes a few weeks and maybe not everyone can do it and takes a lot of effort and stuff. But if we can show that just the act of learning to lucid dream, even before you have that breakthrough concrete evidence results, can be such an empowering experience that helps them mitigate the symptoms of PTSD, then you really could bring it mainstream.
Yeah.
Because we learn that, like, wow, just learning lucid dreaming and all the different psychoeducation around it, like reframing nightmares and the stuff about anxiety dreams being fire drilled and stuff, all of that subsidiary stuff seems to have a big effect too.
And I'm left with the question of whether there's some other mechanism at work in the group other than the learning, that there's some field effect, there's some resonance occurring between individuals, that the energy of the space you created has a kind of intelligence or allows intelligence to work in new ways. I think, and this is what we really explore in the collective and intergenerational trauma work, there's things that happen when we create a conscious field with healing intent that defies our linear models of cause and effect, which I think is really interesting. So I think we're touching on the very edge there of something very profound in terms of how we work together to heal in whatever way or modality we use. There are latent capacities we have as humans that we're reawakening to, reclaiming now, I think. Lucid dreaming being a prime example, that have enormous potential and capability to actually help us heal and resolve issues individually or as groups and as even societies that we would never imagine. And that's why I find this whole conversation so exciting, and particularly your mission and what you're bringing to wake us up to sleep, as your book title suggests, to really help us to reclaim and reawaken to our natural capacities and how much power we actually possess. It's incredibly exciting and inspiring for me personally, and I'm sure for everyone listening.
Thank you. And it is a natural capacity. Just one more point, as you were saying there. Children are natural lucid dreamers. Yeah. Several studies have backed this up.
Wow.
Lucid dreaming is an inbuilt factory installed capacity.
Factory setting,
It's something we forget how to do.
Yeah.
So this tells us two important things. Number one, lucid dreaming is not some alien imposition that we're forcing on the mind. It's actually something natural that we have forgotten how to do. And number two, you don't need to learn how to lucid dream. You need to remember.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that's already there.
Yeah.
And I think in that same way as we need to remember how to lucid dream, we need to remember how to step into this morphic field of healing, just as you said. It's there. This isn't, we talk about these as like new technologies. These are ancient technologies that we are reawakening to.
Yeah.
It's already there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost sloughing off the kind of cultural conditioning that has trained us to think and look at the world in certain ways, and in a sense blinded us to so many of the capacities that we possess that are not valued or recognized or encouraged, and indeed kind of trained out of us.
Yeah,
exactly. This kind of rewilding almost impulse, this kind of rewilding consciousness almost, where we start to slip out of the cultural straitjacket, which can be challenging. I mean, you know, you're walking a very self-directed path. I can think back to the start of the conversation and these events, these moments, these pivotal moments, your near-death experience, meeting the teachers you described, and the people that came in. I mean, it almost feels as a path, almost preordained path that you're walking here, that I think we're going to have this conversation again in 10 years and see that this has moved exponentially forward. So,
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I hope
exciting.
in 10 years' time we're talking about where you can find it on the NHS.
Definitely, yeah. Definitely. And I mean, we talked about EMDR. That was seen as a really far out, but that's now mainstream. So the system can integrate new information and these new updates. So I have no doubt that it's going to be, there'll be kind of dream centers on every high street. We'll be going in and there'll be kind of the masks you talked about and places to lie down, and your voice will be being broadcast through the speakers, and everyone will be kind of working through all their traumas and figuring out their plan for the next day. So,
We can but dream.
Thanks, Charlie. Great to see you.
Thank you so much, Matt.